That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. How long did you wait in line?
Like 3 hours in the morning.
That's too long for me. I
It
would
wasn't
not
too
wait
bad.
in
I
line.
had the Switch, so I played Zelda.
You
the whole
played
time.
Zelda in line? Did anybody harass you and want to play it?
No, other people in line with me were actually playing on their Switch. So
Really?
yeah, it was a sort of a little crew of us all working
Timbers
on Zelda
and
together.
Switch fans all
Yeah.
standing and hanging out in line together. Did anybody talk to each other, or you just stared at it the entire time?
It was a lot of staring. There was some
Yeah.
talking, but a lot of staring. Yeah.
Awkward conversation, and then, okay, yeah, please don't look at me now. I want to play my Switch.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
all right, that's kind of how I figured that would go. All right, looks like we're coming in live here. Hello, everyone. This is Close to the Metal. This is our weekly computing podcast where we talk about in-depth topics having to do with computing. We usually go into one thing and go deep on that, and we're live on Facebook and YouTube right now, so we want your questions and comments as we're going through this show. We also have an audio version available on iTunes and Stitcher and everywhere you get audio podcasts. So today we're going to be talking about the AMD Ryzen series of CPUs. I'm your host, Greg Nibbler. Let's just go right into it. And to my right,
Brad Burke.
it is Brad Burke and
Matt Smith.
Matt Smith right here with us. All right. So as everybody's joining in here, like I said, we're talking about the AMD Ryzen series. And this is, just announced, I believe, last week. Is this when they officially unveiled it, right?
It was,
last week around
it wasn't
this time?
announced, but it
But
was
they showcased
released.
it. Okay. Yeah, because I know it was right around the time of this show that they were going to be doing something with it. And let's jump into it here. With this new line of CPUs, AMD's been increasingly trying to compete more and more with Intel. We know that. Let me ask you guys just right off the bat, should you buy this? Brad?
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah, I think we saw really good performance in sort of a way that we haven't seen from AMD in a while.
Okay.
And I think their promise to support this chipset until at least 2020 is a much longer bet than you're going to get with Intel. So the upgrade path is a lot cleaner. That said, I think these chips, the 7 series, are really high performance, more so than most people need.
Okay.
But for $300, I don't think that's a crazy amount to spend on a CPU at all. So.
Okay, so that's it. You're saying go ahead.
Yeah, if you're in the enthusiast range anyway, definitely consider them.
Okay, all right. Matt, what do you think about
And
this?
I would generally hold off right now.
Okay.
The reason being that, well, kind of what Brad already said. They're very targeted chips.
Brett, your chewing of the ice is wonderful too into the microphone. Just want to make sure
Don't. Yeah. Okay. Pro tip: don't chew ice on a podcast.
we'll get you some chips here in a minute too.
Anyway, yeah. So I mean, like, it's a very targeted thing, and AMD, they talked up extensively that prosumer market, enthusiast market, workstation market when they were doing the reveal, and it's easy to see why. That is where they're excelling right now within a certain window of price point. But on the other hand, that's not where most people buy. I think most people who are even enthusiasts really are looking for something that's going to do everyday applications really quickly and handle all that nicely, and also do some gaming, and that's an area where Ryzen is maybe not, it's not bad, but not as optimal. So yeah, and I do really like the future platform support stuff.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
which we're going to go into some more detail on all of this too here in just a little bit. But yeah, so you like that idea that maybe it can be.
Yeah, I like the idea. It's just that when I'm talking about like recommending something right now, it sort of makes me think like, okay, like AMD has promised this thing through 2020, and that's a nice promise. But on the other hand, it's a promise, and it's kind of something that is.
Are you willing to base this longevity, like really invest for that long based on that promise?
And it's not that like I necessarily think they're like lying or anything. It's just that you might not upgrade between now and then.
Right.
For example, maybe you think the processor's fine and then you never use that benefit. Maybe by then you decide you need to have a motherboard with different features. I mean, it's just kind of like it's the attempt to future-proof, which in my experience like doesn't usually work out that well. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're recommending probably not.
Yeah, and to be clear, it got a recommended award
in
our review, and it is recommended for certain users.
Okay.
But we have a very general audience of digital trends. So if you're just sitting at home and thinking, oh, I'd like a new processor for my gaming computer or whatever, this wouldn't be the first one I'd point you to.
Okay, all right. And again, that review is at digitaltrends.com too, so you can read the full in-depth review if you'd like to. We do have a couple of questions coming in. So again, we're live here on Facebook and YouTube talking about AMD Ryzen, their series of CPUs. We're going to go in-depth some more here in a minute. But YMD Gaming on YouTube asked, what do you think about the Ryzen 4 gaming, which you kind of hit on there for a second. Matt, I know you...
Yeah. So that's a great topic to start off with, gaming. Like, that's something that I think a lot of enthusiasts go for, whether they're huge gamers or just occasional gamers. It's a really nice thing to strut your stuff on your new PC. And what we found is that Ryzen is generally a bit slower than the best Intel hardware.
Okay.
The best like Intel quad cores in that regard. It's not something that's like a terrible difference. It's not
Okay.
it's not like, it's so slow
Oh.
or anything like that. And that's how it used to be. Like with the older AMD processors, not really that hot for gaming performance at all. I just wouldn't recommend them for a gaming PC, period. But, it's still like a difference of up to around 15%, which is, noticeable in games. And so, yeah, like that is, it doesn't perform quite as well as a 7700K, for example.
To be fair, though, we're talking about, when you're talking about a game like For Honor, we have all these benchmarks, and the scores fall anywhere between 71 and 77 frames per second. So you're talking about a difference, where your Ryzen, our 1800X is getting 72, and our 7700K is getting 77 with the RX 480 installed. So they're at the point where it doesn't seem like that is a huge difference in real world aspects, and especially when you talk about like a time spy score. And our Ryzen took a better score than the 7700K did. Granted, very close, like within the margin of error. But in really heavily taxing CPU situations, we still saw competitive performance with the Ryzen chips. I don't think that for most people, again, I think these chips are more power than they need for gaming. I think you're going to get by with a much less expensive CPU. And there's a big part of the thing is there's diminishing returns for gaming over 4 threads. But at that point, games sort of don't use anything beyond that unless they're really well optimized for that. And so these extra cores that we see on the 1800X, just like in the 6950X, they don't really do much. It's kind of, it's extra.
Yeah. I mean, Ryzen's not bad for gaming. It's just, to me, it's the question of, well, why would you buy the chip that's a little bit slower for your intended task?
Right.
I can't find a compelling reason for that.
Especially if the price works out to be about the,
which,
close
I mean,
enough.
and again, so For Honor, extreme detail at 1080p resolution. With an RX 480, we found that an R7 1800X gets 71 frames per second on average in the benchmark. And actually, the R7 1700, which we've tested but not fully reviewed yet, got 73. So that tells you there's a little bit of a margin of error there, and they're performing pretty much the same. The Core i7 7700K got 77 frames per second. So we're talking about a difference of 5 to 7 frames per second. I don't know if I did the math right there.
Right.
Anyway, but it's not
close.
a lot.
It's
not a lot.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely going to be some people there that are going to be like, maybe I'll take the Ryzen processor. But if you just ask my recommendation, I would say get the 7700K because it is quicker. And not by a lot, but hey,
but there is a difference.
that's what the numbers seem to indicate.
Now, if you're going to make that
For the
upgrade,
RX 480 at least too, because we tested with the 980 Ti as well.
There wasn't
They were a
much
lot
difference
closer.
there, although we did see some things crop up again in Civilization 6. There were some little fluctuations there. Again, we're talking on the order of less than 10 frames per second, so not a big difference.
So are there aspects that the Ryzen series excels over Intel?
Yeah. Well, Brad, you want to
multi-threaded workloads?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anytime you're using any kind of application that's going to use rely on more than just the speed of one single core.
Okay.
So the deal, typically is that as you get more cores, the cores tend to run slower. It's facts of life. So the idea that we can, let me pull up I'm on the wrong sheet here. We saw better performance in 7-zip. In our compression tests until you got up into the 6950X, which again is a that's a $1,500, $1,600 chip. So that's 3 times the price
Right.
of Ryzen's R7, and that's Intel's top of the line. And I think they more compared it. AMD was more willing to compare it to the 6800K.
And the
is sort of-
6900K.
Yeah, the 6900K, which I think are probably more reasonable choices for a lot of people. A lot of X99 builds, unless you're really just throwing thousands of dollars at it. And like part of the deal is that you're getting a better 7-zip score, more cores. That just happens. You're getting a slower or a better handbrake score as well than the 7700K. Things that are well optimized programs that are using lots of cores at once, rather than relying, like I said, on speed. So we also saw really strong multi-core scores in Geekbench, which is a synthetic benchmark. They kind of fell behind in single-core scores, as we expect.
I'm seeing a couple of comments coming in here, too. Again, if you're watching live on YouTube and Facebook, feel free to drop those in there. James says the 7700 is better for gaming. 1800X appears to be worth it if you want to do things other than gaming.
And I would
What do you think about that?
I would kind of almost argue that the 7700K is it's great for gaming, but again, like it's more than you need. Like an i5 6600K also isn't going to bottleneck a 980 Ti. You're not going to have any issues there reaching its full frame potential. You're probably not going to be using the whole CPU, which is kind of something that we've gotten into, that this is sort of an odd approach from AMD to offer these really high-end chips while only offering budget range GPUs, which is sort of the opposite of what people usually go for. You usually you get your mid-range CPU because you can spend more on your GPU, get a high-end GPU, and get better gaming performance. Like, we're talking here about a total of 6 frames per second at 70 plus frames per second, whereas upgrading the GPU from an RX 480 to a 980 Ti is like, another 25 to 30% frames. Like, that's where your real performance
That's a big
comes
difference.
in. So it's kind of odd that this is, to say that the Ryzen R7 1800X is good for gaming. Well, yeah, sure. So is the 6950X, but you probably don't need that.
Yeah,
Unless you're running two 1080s or something, And
then it'll make a difference. We do have some questions coming in about Intel now, too, but I don't know if you guys want to tackle those yet. People are on 2 different formats here on Facebook and YouTube are asking, what do you think Intel's going to do to try to combat this next? As far as, are they going to come up with another project? Are they going to redesign what they're doing? Or do you think this is just a little blip for them and it's not really that much competition?
They slashed prices a bit.
Yeah.
We did see in the lead up to Ryzen that there was sort of they cut the 7700K to like $300 or less. So from like 360.
Yeah, there were some price drops ahead of the Ryzen launch, and it was dependent on, like, some retailers had it more than others. Right now, Newegg is still selling 7700K for $350, so some of that may have bounced back. But cutting prices is definitely always an option for Intel.
Yeah.
So that's one way they might respond if they feel like they're getting threatened. Also, I mean, for Intel does have more projects in the works. They got another architecture planned for hopefully end of this year. Cannon Lake, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
I believe the latest teases were that was going to be an end of the year sort of thing, and then they'll move on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. So definitely Intel is just going to keep on trying to do what it's done before to combat this. They have a lot of options. That's sort of the problem with AMD's position as the underdog, is like they're limited on options, and Intel is just like, well, we can just cut the prices.
Pretty much
because we were charging a lot for them in the first place because we didn't have anyone threatening us. So that's always a way to
They
respond.
have all that margin built in to just, we'll just drop it a little bit.
Especially with like the Core i7 6950X and processors like that were like $1,000 to $1,500. It's like they don't need the charge that much, So we could definitely see them as a price drop though.
So that's probably going to be the way that they just try to combat this right off the bat. Is just drop it a little bit, see if they can cut it, use their name brand to try to compete against AMD. I see some other comments coming in. Bob was disputing your thought of running 2 1080s, I think is what you said a minute ago.
Oh, you shouldn't do that.
You said you shouldn't. Bob says that it would still run better on a 7700K rather than on the AMD.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that for the most part, the chips of the $300 plus power level aren't really necessary unless you're running
you're doing
on
that.
A single GPU gaming system. You really don't need anything more than, I think, a nice i5 with a solid cooler.
Okay, all right. So clarifying that again, if you do have more comments coming in, questions, feel free to drop those in there. So getting back to the chip itself, let's go into a little bit more detail about where it does excel and what it does do well, especially for people who are just joining us right now. It's talking about the AMD Ryzen CPU series. Brad, where does this thing work the best?
Well, I think we're going to see, like I said, you're going to see the most gains encoding video, handbrake, things like that. Streaming was a big one that they pushed because, a game is only using part of the CPU, so you can dedicate the other, a lot more resources than you would be able to on a quad core, theoretically. We haven't done any testing on that to see how that actually works out, but yeah.
Yeah, so like in theory, like the things you would be using this for would be if you were a video editor, for example.
Okay.
I could see, like, if you're a video editor and you you're working with a variety of video editing tools, encoding in different ways, and you want a processor that's really good for that and doesn't, cost a ton, then Ryzen probably looks like it's going to be an appealing option because it does perform extremely well under those workloads, and it's a lot cheaper than the Intel chips were.
Yeah.
So clearly, like, I don't think there's really any arguing that there's a good value proposition in that sort of area. And I mean, that's what AMD knows too. That's why they've been pitching it like this the entire time.
Right.
I guess some other examples would be things, if you're doing like batch photo editing, if you are doing programming in certain situations, you might like big projects, you have a compiler or other tools that are really good at multi-threaded workloads, might be of interest to you. I had another one just on the tip of my tongue.
Another
I forgot.
example of what
But
it'd be
yeah,
good for.
like that's the sort of stuff, and this is like heavy stuff, work stuff. Not the sort of thing that's very glamorous. But it's also an area where Intel is just sort of, they have had free reign to jack up the prices. And a lot of people were unhappy with that because it did seem a little unfair. And AMD
But if there's nobody else out there to compete against, what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And also with those kind of workloads, there's very compelling argument for the more expensive chips in that oftentimes a faster processor actually saves the person money.
Yeah.
Like if you are trying to encode videos and you are doing that and you have your machine doing that, it can't do anything else, right? Like, so you kind of have like a limitation there, how much you can get done encoding videos based on the speed of your processor. And if it's faster, you can simply do more in a given amount of time. That's very valuable. So,
right, you could make that money back pretty quick.
Yeah,
If
exactly,
that's the case.
exactly.
Yeah, if you can save on that. Jackson on Facebook says, hard to break my Intel NVIDIA combo. However, the 1800X and the price point may make it worth it for a cheaper mobile PC. And he also says that 3D gaming would be nice with this chip as well. Or 3D rendering, excuse me. 3D rendering, not 3D gaming. That's a whole different thing. 3D rendering would be nicer with this chip too. So kind of getting some comments here and feedback coming in about the AMD Ryzen series. I'm curious if anybody out there has picked it up because it is available, correct? It went out.
Yeah, it's
sale.
been available for about a week now.
Yeah.
It's a little less, but pre-orders went up about 2 weeks ago. So people have actually been able to use it for about 5 days, it looks like. I think the second was when it actually shipped.
Okay. So, yeah, so it is out there. Somebody's probably already has their hand on it. Let's see. Taking a look at some of the other questions that are coming in, too, here on YouTube. YMD Gaming, which keep those coming, says, so do you personally think streamers should upgrade to this chip? It's a complicated question because it depends on what you're running right now.
Yeah.
But if somebody really wanted to, say somebody's starting out and they really want to get into streaming a lot, would this be a good chip for that?
I think it would be, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So recommended as far as that. I mean, I guess, yeah, again, it's kind of a complicated question because it depends on what you have right now. But if it's an upgrade, go to this one.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Intel is still good as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is the kind of workload where that really does benefit from having more than 4 cores. And to get, like you're saying, to get that from Intel would cost you $200 to $300 more than it's going to cost you from AMD to get those extra cores.
And that kind of points also to, I think, one of the overarching stories with this Ryzen launch is that you probably need to know a bit more about what you're doing with your computer than you have had to in a while to buy a processor.
Yeah.
Because it's like the Ryzen processors and the Intel processors in the same price range are kind of excelling in different ways. And that means that depending on what you're doing, you're going to have much different results. You know, like it's not like you can just buy the processor and feel like it's going to excel in all things.
Right.
Which perhaps, you know, at certain points in the past had been the case. You really have to pick and choose your battles here when deciding between the Intel and the Ryzen. So if you are considering picking one up, you really just you gotta look yourself in the mirror and be like, what do I
who am I?
What do I use
want
my
for
computer for? Really?
Yeah.
And what do I want out of it? And if the answer is that you want to do like really heavy hitting professional level applications, then the Ryzen is going to look more attractive. If you want to do streaming, that's probably going to make the Ryzen more attractive. If you're just like, well, I'm an enthusiast, I like to have a really fast computers. Sometimes I play games, or maybe a lot of times I play games, but that's really my heaviest workload. Then you know the classic Intel Core i5 or i7 choice is probably the safer bet. And also, as of right now, you know, sort of an issue too is that there's no Ryzen below $330. So we generally recommend something like a Core i5, as Brad said, for a lot of people, even enthusiasts. And there's not an AMD competitor right there right now, so we'll have to wait a few months before that.
Do you think they'll have another one that comes out?
Well, the Ryzen 5 line, it does not have a release date, but it's slated to be by the end of the second quarter.
Okay.
So that's basically summer, most likely.
So then we'll have something that's a little bit more competitive.
Yeah.
So really what it comes down to, I mean, you really have to be a little bit more knowledgeable than before. You really have to do your research to really understand. Like you said, look yourself in the mirror, but you have to really understand what it is you're wanting and what you are getting specifically from each one of these chips if you're going to do that upgrade from the CPU, excuse me.
And if not, you probably want an i5-60 or 7600K.
If you were just to buy a general one.
If all of this is really like starting to make your eyes glaze over, then an i5 is probably the right chip for you.
Probably most of the people watching this are pretty knowledgeable, at least as far as where you are right now. But if not, these are definitely things to take a look at and consider what they're talking about when you're deciding to upgrade your CPU. So a couple of other questions here, and again, keep dropping those in there if you have anything else specific to ask Matt and Brad about these things. And I see some that are coming in as we're talking about this. All right, here we go. I'll do this one. Jackson says, "Do you think this chip will be compatible with most applications? I must always give tech a year to get bugs sorted out. My old 970s had a serious issue with the L2 cache. What do you guys think?"
I mean, I don't think you'll have any issue with compatibility.
Think it'll be work
modern,
pretty well with
modern
everything?
chipset stuff. It's just not like an issue.
Well,
there.
yeah, I mean, like it is, you know, the same instruction set as always. So there's not going to be any problems with that. There's been, you know, some argument about whether or not certain applications, including games, might perform better as optimizations come out. But I mean, could be, could not be.
But overall,
as far as bugs, though, I wouldn't expect anything. You know, I also wouldn't say guarantee it. If you're worried about bugs, I mean, bugs have happened in processors. That happened with Phenom, I believe. AMD's big release in what? It was like 2008, I think. They had a bug there. There was recently an Intel bug. I don't remember the name of it. It happens. Like that does happen. And if you're really worried about that, then wait a little bit.
Wait a while.
And wait for it to shake out. We're not going to know right off the bat whether or not there's a bug in the architecture. It was that easy to find. They would have already found it. So
yeah, that's true. That's a good point. All right. So continuing on here, let's see. Taking a look at, do you think this is a good idea? Do you think it's good that Ryzen exists, regardless of what it is? Do you think this is good that we have a competitor out there? Do you think it's serving a purpose versus Intel? Brad, what do you think? I know this is a question you wanted to answer.
Yeah, you know, I think that, like you were saying too, Intel has been able to kind of jack up the price and lead the market. Bulldozer wasn't what AMD expected of it or what anyone else expected of it, and it's made those chips really hard to buy. And, you know, that the desktop segment is really important. Those system builders are important because, like, I mean, we haven't seen systems in years now that have AMD chips in them. Like, you're not going to find a pre-built system with an AMD chip in it unless you go out of your way to find one.
Do you think that's going to change?
I think it might. I think that this might be the point where, you know, depending on how these chips, we don't have mobile versions really yet, so they aren't going to show up in laptops, I don't think. But, you know, we've seen systems, you know, like you're always going to see your system builders pushing out systems with Ryzen chips. But the point is that these are more competitive than they have been in years. And that is making Intel, it's causing Intel to have to cut prices a little bit, to have to sort of get leaner and start fighting again to, not just be pushing out incremental upgrades, because I think I'm sick of just, oh, good, 10 to 15% more performance and some new feature that gets used 1% of the time, like, neat. Why do I need to spend $300 to do this? And I think a lot of people are in that boat of still using second, third, fourth generation Intel chips because they don't need to upgrade. There's no reason to.
Yeah.
And I think AMD is going to try and give people a reason to move towards it. But I do think, like, optimization matters. And as people start to use, hopefully, more applications that use more threads more effectively, as more people have more cores, developers will make that more of a priority. Hopefully, that could, down the line, make a bigger difference. And I think Intel may respond in the next few generations by starting to push that top-level i7 into a 6-core chip. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say that they're always going to be quad cores. I think at some point Intel's going to have to reposition because people are going to want more cores. More people are streaming. More people are doing video at home.
Right.
And, people aren't doing less of that. Certainly.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's only going to grow exponentially as far as that aspect of it. So, yeah, you think this could help push them along a little bit with that. Matt, what do you think?
Well, I think competition obviously is good. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not going to say it's
Do you
bad.
do you think Ryzen's an actual competitor, though?
In a limited sense,
Yeah.
I do think we all need to keep our expectations in check. Certainly, all the boutique sort of builders came out and were very happy at the start, providing Ryzen builds pretty much right out of the gate. When they actually announced the pre-orders, you could go pre-order a thing from like Origin PC, for example, and that makes sense for them because they are building a lot of enthusiast computers, not just for gaming, but for people that do all kinds of heavy workloads on their PCs. Now, as far as the mainstream adoption, I think that's still up in the air. I've spoken with people at companies, the larger companies that make computers, and they have said, that we are going to have some of these Ryzen chips, but it's, also not a complete, they're not planning to offer a Ryzen alternative in every segment where it's available. In fact, it looks like they're really going to just sort of dip their toe in the water and offer it on a few systems as an option, or in some cases maybe a dedicated system that has a Ryzen chip only without an Intel option. See how it goes.
Yeah, test it out.
And then proceed from there. I mean, that's the general sense I've been giving. I definitely have not been hearing that, all the big companies are like, yes, we're going to just roll it out. All of our systems are going to have Ryzen chips where it makes sense for the price point. They're definitely not eager to jump on that bandwagon so quickly. I mean, it's risky for them.
Yeah.
And also, Intel has a bit of a reputation for being not so happy with partners that, don't sell as many of their chips as they would like.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole thing. It's a whole thing with laws and lawsuits and everything, and but it is what it is, and the fact is that Intel is a very aggressive company. So we'll have to see how they respond and what the uptake ends up being. I think that it's going to be pretty slow with the big manufacturers, honestly.
Well, speaking of big manufacturers, I think you kind of just answered this question in here, but YMD asks on YouTube, do you think Apple's ever going to use these chips in their future laptops? No. Brad says no.
I mean,
seems unlikely.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much longer those laptops have in them. That line is
That's
maybe
a whole
not
other
long for this
question.
world.
That's a different question altogether, yeah.
I mean, if Apple were to change their processor, I would think that they would change it to something that they built rather than try and go to AMD. But
yeah. Okay, so that's the Apple question. Buck on Facebook asked, should I hop on the Ryzen bandwagon or hold out for the AMD Plumbus? I'm probably saying it incorrect. Plumbus. I don't know. That may be something that we don't have
a Rick
an
and Morty
for.
thing?
I'm not sure.
I
may have just
that's what I'm getting
got
to.
Howard Stern. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Maybe I just said something I shouldn't have said. No, but the next AMD line, I guess, is what he's asking about.
Well, if you're talking about Ryzen 2, the next iteration of the Zen architecture that's behind it. Whether you should wait for that, I mean, if you don't need the upgrade, I think that's certainly a great plan, actually.
Hold out.
AMD says, AMD's pitch is that part of their pitch, it's a small part of it, but something that I took note of is they're like, hey, this is our new clean sheet architecture, and we've just started. So what that means is that we're not like Intel where we're iterating on this very, the core architecture has been iterated on for a long time now. AMD's like, we're not doing that. We got a new design, and that means when our next one comes out, it's going to be even better by a larger margin than you would expect. So hey, you can't wait for that. That was a little bit of their pitch. So maybe that's true, maybe not. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. And if you didn't have to buy a processor right now, I would wait and see, because if they fulfill that promise, then the Ryzen 2 or whatever they call their next iteration could be really good, but who knows?
I'm going to guess it's not the Plumbus. Thank you, Buck. You got me. All right. That's fair enough. Baba Booey. All right. Well, we're kind of wrapping.
Brad picked up on it.
No, Brad got it. Yeah, he called that out, too. He's like, Brad knew what I was doing. All right. You got me. Okay. Well, the final verdict here, should someone buy this Ryzen chip? Should you buy it?
I think if you're already looking at the $300 plus segment, you should definitely consider this chip.
Okay.
And like Matt said, you should look in the mirror and think, what am I doing with my computer? And I think if it's just like, hey, I want to play games on it, then yeah, maybe not. Maybe an i5 is a better choice. Save that $100 and spend a little more on your GPU, and you'll have a better time. But if you are really into streaming and you've got extra cash to kick around, if you do video editing on the side, that kind of thing, then it might be, it's worth considering, certainly.
Okay.
If you're already looking at an X99 chip, I think it's a better option.
All right.
Yeah.
And wrapping up, Matt, you kind of said probably not, I think, in the beginning of the show. But
Yeah, sort of just, like Brad said, and like we said earlier, you got to look yourself in the mirror. I think for most people, the
do a long, hard look.
Yeah.
Just really
consider your
assess
life choices.
yourself.
Where are you going? Where have you been? Probably that means Ryzen is not right now the one for you, but maybe it is. Maybe it is.
All right. So we'll leave it up to the individual judgment on that part. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is Close to the Metal. This is our weekly podcast where we talk about computing. We're live every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time, talking about a specific subject. If you have questions or comments or anything else that you want to get to us, go ahead and comment on one of these videos, either at digitaltrends.com, where you can see a full review of everything that we're talking about, and we always have updates on reviews, or send an email, podcast@digitaltrends.com. We also have an audio version of this show, too, so you can subscribe on iTunes, leave us a review, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. Just subscribe to us right there. Again, this is Close to the Metal right here at Digital Trends. We'll be back next week with another episode.